Rise by Teese Snyder. Chapter 36. Bad Blood. Alex Vossel, Eden Island, 2018. I met my second wife many years after the death of my first. In the long interim between marriages, I had remained, save for the occasional fling or hired entertainment, very much alone and isolated from any semblance of compassion or genuine intimacy with another woman. The pain that the sudden and unforeseen death of my first wife, Eden, had caused me emanated through my every thought and action, slowly turning me more and more bitter and jaded even as I concurrently laid the groundwork for my plan to remake the world. That plan had become my new life, and it had filled the void inside of me that Eden had left behind. Then, years later, when I had first met eyes with Hannah at a lavish gala, I presumed, and no doubt correctly so, that my soon-to-be second wife was already well aware of not only who I was, but the vast expanse of my fortune and power. Despite that fact, she somehow managed to remain not only calm and confident around me, but woefully seductive, witty, agreeable, vivacious, and level-headed. It was because of these characteristics, if not the person she was deep down, that I had decided to open myself up enough to allow her to intrude upon the memories of my first wife by making her my second. And though the decision to wed had been far more rational than emotional, nevertheless a part of me did genuinely care for her, if not so much for the woman herself as the companionship she gave and the son we now shared. I had found myself thinking of those early days often since I had released the infection upon the world. I had found that rather than looking to the future as I had often done earlier in life, I now looked to the past in the uncertainty of the times and the melancholy ambiance of all those who I had so graciously decided to invite to my island and spare from the disease. Though I felt they should be grateful and hopeful instead, they were solemn and detached. I felt they should be appreciative and resolute. Instead, they were disheartened and lethargic. And though I had never paid much mind to the temperament of those I would keep company in the early days of the New World Order, nevertheless, in those moments, it was far more of a distraction than I could bear to burden. Even my second wife, Hannah, had fallen ill to the sickness of what I could only deem deep depression. And as I sat across from her at a lengthy glass table in a secluded dining room in my mansion, I realized that that was what lingered in my conscience most, withholding my ability to enjoy myself. I missed the way Hannah used to pretend she loved me, just as I used to pretend I loved her back. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked, slowly sliding my knife through the cut of lamb on my plate as I concurrently dissected my wife's demeanor. We sat alone for dinner for the first time in a long while, without our son Desmond, who for the evening had been sent for a sleepover with one of the only other children on the island. However, despite my best efforts to provide some alone time for Hannah and myself, the fact that she was far less interested in the occasion than I was quickly wearing my patience. I wanted her to be herself again, or failing that, to at least act like it. "Yes, I'm feeling fine," Hannah replied, lazily turning her fork in her hands, staring through the food before her. "Are you sure?" "Yes, Alex, I'm sure." "Well," I sighed, momentarily placing my knife down and dabbing my mouth clean with a napkin, If you're not feeling ill, then something else must be the matter. No, nothing, she answered, barely able to stomach the brief moment she pulled her eyes up to look at me. I glared at her as she returned her aloof sights to the meal we were lucky enough to have, ungrateful and dismayed, just like everyone else since the infection had struck. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath, unable to tolerate the manner in which she had been conducting herself with me, barely speaking to or looking at me for weeks. "You haven't seemed yourself lately," I exclaimed bluntly, hoping that my statement would jar her out of her misery and persuade her to speak with me. Her eyes slowly pulled up from looking at her plate, and she shook her head. "Nobody's been themselves lately." "That's no excuse." "Yes, Alex, it is," she stated, tilting her chin up from her slumped-over shoulders and pitiful melancholy posturing, holding her eyes to mine with simmering contempt of all things. The audacity. "You have no reason to feel sorry for yourself," I exclaimed, plucking my glass of wine from the long table we sat at. "We are lucky to be here." She placed her fork down and sat upright, taking many deep breaths as if she wished to speak, but never opened her mouth. Her eyes flared, and she clenched her jaw. We sat staring at each other for a moment until I picked my fork up again and returned to my meal, deciding for the both of us that there was no point in bickering any further if she wasn't willing to admit that she was wrong. "I've arranged for a party in the next couple of days. Perhaps that will help boost your spirits," I informed her, a moment of silence following my words. I ate my meal, agitated by the absence of any sound coming from her end of the table, and eventually looked up from my food once more to see Hannah's bewildered and appalled expression. I tossed my napkin onto my plate and took a slow, brooding breath. I had had enough. "What is it?" I shouted, pushed to my limits by her cold shoulder in clear dismay. "You have been moping around, barely speaking to me for weeks now. You smile for Desmond, you say please and thank you to the help, but you don't so much as look at me. So what is it?" The slender part in her lips slowly closed until all that remained was a faint and condescending look of disbelief. She stared at me now, no doubt content to have broken my spirits, and I glared at her, expecting an explanation. She placed her forearms on the table and clasped her hands tightly, pressing them together as if it took her every ounce of strength she had to keep herself calm and collected. Then, after another tedious moment, she broke her silence. "Was it just luck that we were on the island when the infection spread?" she asked, her tone falling halfway between curiosity and accusation. I held my breath for a moment, contemplating how to respond. She had never questioned what I told her on the day of the infection, that it had been Nathan's project at Eden Corporation, not my own, that I had tried to stop him, and that there was nothing that could be done. And while she, not unlike everyone else, had struggled greatly with the burden of reality, I had convinced them of the lie, and they and she had not dared question it. Until now. Of course it was luck. But if that's not a good enough rationale for you, then call it fate, I replied, attempting to brush off her question without addressing the implications of her asking it. Her expression soured as I spoke, and she began to shake her head. "It was just luck that in the month building up to the infection, you ensured we had a full staff and additional security personnel here on the island. It was just luck that we have enough food and supplies here to last everyone 5 to 10 years. It was just luck that all of your closest friends and business associates happened to be at sea when the disease spread, and it's just luck that you now have access to an unmanned drone base that you intend to use to wipe the world clean of a disease you knew about in advance, and yet supposedly did none of the things I've mentioned to protect yourself against, she exclaimed, her tone slowly raising in volume and spite as she spoke. I swallowed an uncomfortable lump in my throat and did my best to refrain from showing how furious her words had made me. I had somehow forgotten that she wasn't just a simple trophy wife. I had wanted our son to be a genius, which, unfortunately, meant his mother would have to be one as well. Despite that fact, she had somehow mustered the courage and lost her senses enough to not only question me, but to accuse me. I leaned forward to give my rebuttal. Yes, Hannah, I stated coldly, locking my damning eyes with hers. It was very, very lucky. And if for some reason you feel the need to continue to malign that luck based on nothing but pessimistic slander and disbelief, then I feel the need to remind you once more of just how lucky you have been, I finished, making it clear just how upset she had made me by inferring the potential repercussions of doing so. She clenched her jaw once more and took a furious breath, leaning forward to give her rebuttal. Nathan called me a few days before all this happened. Did you know that? She asked, studying my reaction. I held my breath and froze, barely able to believe what she had just told me. Despite my best efforts to remain unaffected, I knew that she would be able to detect my complete and utter shock from her words, either through a twitch of my brow or a festering contempt in my eyes. In truth, I had had no idea that Nathan, my former best friend and confidant at Eden Corporation, had called her, or for that matter, what he could possibly have told her. I shook my head in response and waited to hear more, tensely clenching my pant leg under the table. You didn't know that? I rigidly shook my head again, staring coldly at her, so surprised I was momentarily unable to keep my true emotions and motivations for them bottled up. He didn't think you'd suspect he might reach out to me, since he and I had never really gotten along, but then again, you never were any good at reading people, were you, Alex? What did he say to you? I asked, doing my best to try and keep my voice monotone, not panicked. Care to guess? Why would I care to guess? Why don't you just tell me? I growled, threatened, and backed into a corner. He could have said anything. He could have ruined everything. And if this was the reason she had been so spiteful towards me of late, then our relationship now suffered from a severe case of irreconcilable differences. I had to know. She would give me the answers I wanted, or so help me, I would force them from her. I clenched my jaw and took a slow breath, silent and frantic, running the same question in my head over and over again. What did he say to you? He told me the truth. The truth about what? About you. What is that supposed to mean, Hannah? Stop being so cryptic and just tell me already, I insisted, doing my best to refrain from raising my voice again or saying anything she might not already know or suspect. But as I stared into her miserable expression, the feeling in my gut began to impede upon my ability to reason. She knew. I could see it in her eyes, and her refusal to just come right out and say it tormented me. She took a moment's pause in the conversation to delve into her thoughts and ponder them over a held breath. "Do you know why I married you?" she asked, finally breaking her silence. I frowned, failing to see the importance of the question. "I don't see how that's particularly relevant right now. What did he say to you?" I demanded once more, anxious and panicked thoughts flooding my mind. What if Nathan suspected I was up to something? What if he had been looking more closely into my actions at Eden Corporation than I knew? He had mentioned, the last time that I saw him on the day I was removed from Eden Corporation, that he was worried about me. He had mentioned that the things I was doing made no sense, but I was too confident in the secret I had kept, and how diligently I had kept it, to think anything of him. I was too sure of his trust and too heartless with the tender remains of our long-standing friendship. Dear God, what did he say to her? What did she know? What did he know? "You don't care to know the truth about why I married you?" Anna asked, neither offended nor surprised by my hurried and callous words to answer her question. "I married you for your money, Alex. That's usually the case when a beautiful woman decides to wed a much older and richer man." "What does that have to do with anything? Just tell me what he said to you," I exclaimed, my frustration and insecurity bleeding into my tone of voice. I cleared my throat to try and force myself to calm down, to maintain the cool demeanor that I rarely broke, in no mood for her petty insults or insights. My hand began to shake, and I felt a cold sweat begin to form on my brow. I had never felt this way before. I was losing control. "And you married me so that you could fuck me, and so that I could have your children, so that you could have Desmond and a nice, pretty trophy wife to look over him while you tended to other, more important matters. Isn't that right?" "I'm not in the mood for this," I growled, contemplating my options, trying to decide what I could do and who, if anyone, she might have already spoken to about this very matter. I remained seated, unaccustomed to surprises and nauseated by uncertainty. I was afraid. For the first time since the death of my first wife, I was afraid. I still remember the looks on my friends' faces when I told them I was with you, and then when I told them I was going to marry you. Of course, they're not my friends anymore. No one is. Because this place, this island, is all that's left of the world. It's all you left of the world. But it wasn't until you locked us all here with you that I realized how much our life together is like a prison, she confessed, her eyes now sorrowful, brooding tears forcing their ways to the surface as she poured the irrelevant depths of her heart out to me. I remained silent, waiting for her to finish, with the hope that by doing so she might tell me the only thing I cared to hear. And I deserve it. I deserve to feel as miserable as I do for being with you. So that's what it is, Alex. That's what's been bothering me. I married a monster. He destroyed the world, and now I'm in prison with him. Her head dropped from my line of sight for the first time since she began her tirade, looking away in solemn disbelief of the situation she had found herself in. And for that moment, I allowed my expression to crumble, revealing everything that I was attempting to hide from her, convinced that I had been caught and my plans had been spoiled. However, as I struggled with the overwhelming and unfamiliar surge of emotions, the cold, rational contempt I had for all those who would dare to question or oppose me formed a clear resolution in my mind, a sudden and relieving thought that quelled my uncertainty and allowed me to relax. For though I didn't know what Nathan had said to her, or what he might have truly known about me, nevertheless, here I sat. And so long as I was on my island, I would control everyone and everything else on it as well. Hannah, I sighed, pushing my chair back from the table. I don't know exactly what Nathan said to you that's made you so upset, but given his and my long history together, it could be an infinite number of things. So if you would be so kind, please, pretty please, just tell me what it is he said to you, so that I, not he, can be the one to tell you the truth. I asked one more time, staring with trembling anticipation as she thought over my request and slowly parted her lips to respond. The truth? She gasped, nearly laughing at my words, before returning once more to her melancholy scowl. He said that you would try to blame him. I'm sorry, what? You heard me. Blame him for what, exactly? For what happened? For whatever it was you were up to, the infection, she confessed, finally giving me some sense of what she knew and whether or not it could jeopardize all that I had planned. I leaned back in my chair, trying to think of a lie that could crush her sense of reason as she continued speaking. I didn't understand what the hell he was talking about, and I told him not to bother me anymore. But then, after it happened, you told me that you had seen the virus before. You told me that it was Nathan's project at Eden Corporation, not yours, and that the infection was his fault. Blaming him, just like he said you would. That doesn't mean anything, Hannah, I stated, feeling the complexion drain from my face as a cool shiver worked its way along the length of my spine. What else did he say? Why doesn't that mean anything? Because the way he and I left things, Nathan would have said anything to try and ruin me. He would have told you anything to try and to defer the blame. No, that's not true. Yes, it is. No, it isn't, Hannah shouted, refusing to let me pave her concerns over with more lies. A dangerous decision. Don't bullshit me, Alex. I know what you did. I know you'll never admit it, and that you'll either exile me for speaking about it or try to put me in a grave. But I will not sit here by your side and pretend that we were just lucky. I know what you did. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't blink or breathe or swallow or so much as allow myself to reason. Instead, I fluttered my eyes as my thoughts returned to bloody murder. He had people watching you, Alex. People in the government, in the intelligence apparatus, watching what you were doing. Excuse me? I gasped. Spies, Alex, spies, I whispered, repeating her words, my fear building as all the possibilities of what I didn't know flooded to mind. I took a moment to think to myself, struggling to keep my composure as my wife's eyes burned through me, expecting answers, expecting a confession. They knew, Alex, and Nathan tried to warn me. Then why didn't they stop me? I asked, posing the question both to her and myself. If they knew what I was supposedly up to, if they suspected I was the culprit, then why didn't they stop me? Hannah sat silently, pensively, unable to provide an answer for my question that would reinforce her opinion of my guilt, or at least so I assumed. Suddenly, the door to the dining room burst open, and Nahuel, the gigantic and foreboding commander of my guards, marched quickly towards me. I turned and frowned at him, genuinely surprised by whatever it was he had come to tell me. Then, to my complete and utter shock, he had the audacity to not only place his hands upon me, but to lift me into the air and slam me on top of the long glass table where my wife and I had been eating dinner just moments before. I felt the glass crack beneath my weight as one of Nahuel's hands clasped around my throat, and the other removed a foot-long hunting knife, gliding its way under my jugular. My wife slowly approached from his side, holding her personal two-way radio that I insisted everyone on the island keep with them at all times, with the intention of being able to spy on them. As I looked at my wife, however, I realized that she had kept her radio on for Nahuel to eavesdrop, that she had no doubt spoken to Nahuel beforehand, and that his presence was either to safeguard herself from me or to put an end to my life. Apparently, he had heard enough lies, and now they intended to make me talk.